Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and a lot of the video games we love are actually dying, ladies and gentlemen, and it's one of the reasons why I want to make these videos because, to be real with you, game preservation is a super important thing for me, okay? It's no joke that I always talk about, programs like Stop Killing Games, okay? I sound like a broken record, but when I see things like them reaching 44% of their goal, over 400,000 people from Europe have actually jumped in trying to keep the games we love alive for the future is actually endearing to see, okay? I am a gamer, a capital G gamer, all right? Some would consider that a slur. I consider that amazing. And I saw this video from Ross at Accursed Farms, who is actually the person spearheading the Stop Killing Games campaign. Beautiful initiative. And, recently the volunteers of this community showcased a pretty unfortunate demographic. The dead games list. Now, out of this list, if you actually look at this good old spreadsheet, ladies and gentlemen, there are 792 games currently thrown into this actual list. Some of those games are at risk of dying, and some of those games are actually dead. Do you guys play Zenless Zone Zero and actually enjoy it? It's a gacha game, all right, but you know what? Nowadays, I can say very clearly, gacha games have a lot of gameplay to them, okay? And it's not just a slot machine. They're all pretty damn good experiences. Do you enjoy the story for this? Do you enjoy the content? Do you understand that it's tied to an online service? And down the road, when the time comes, and it will, all right, it's going to be yanked off life support. And then all those memories, all those experiences are going to be taken away. You'll never be able to experience this game again unless, of course, someone from the fan community makes an offline private server, which is not the easiest thing always to do, or the game or the company behind it actually produces a patch that lets you play the game that you wanted offline, which is a novel concept. Now, obviously, there are some games like X-Defiant, which I'm sure a lot of you guys probably don't care about. It's one of those UB shooters. But like I always say, okay, for every shitty game, there is one fan. I was not a fan of games like Anthem, okay? I'm not a fan of this game, all right? I'm sure there's many of you that are not a fan of this game. There exists one fan of Anthem. And you know what? I will fight for that one fan so that they can play their dog shit game till the ends of the earth. Okay, they can pass this down generation on generation. We can have legions of people that are somehow fans of that dog water, in my opinion, of course. So, of course, the more I look through this list, the actual, the depression kind of kicks in, okay? Now, to give you an idea, you might be wondering, but Muda, aren't these games completely like online MMOs and experiences that, probably are meant to be shut down anyways? Yeah, that's true. But remember, online MMOs don't always have to be shut down, okay? Back when I was younger and I could not afford a monthly subscription to World of Warcraft, I may have went to a friend's house and probably seen the World of WoW private servers. Again, I wasn't doing this. I'm sure it was a friend of mine's house where this was involved, okay? You get the idea. Now, of course, this is the way that I could actually play older versions of World of Warcraft, and for a lot of people, before Classic WoW was introduced, this was the way that people were able to experience dead versions of World of Warcraft, the original, release version points of World of Warcraft. Some versions that people enjoy more than the recent stuff, okay? In fact, even beyond all this, there's other MMOs, like Final Fantasy, I believe it's 11? Yeah, Final Fantasy XI was a multiplayer one. And of course, there are ways that you can play it officially, and down the road, when the servers are gone, there exists a way for people to access private server technology so they can host it themselves, they can run it locally, and experience this one landmark of gaming. You might not consider FF11 to be huge, but it was a pretty big turning point for console MMO games. And for anybody to find a way to experience it down the road is always a good thing, okay? Now, one of the things that I always saw in this list was, look at this one right over here, Final Fantasy XI. Now, of course, Final Fantasy XI, thankfully, is fan-preserved, meaning that if you go through the avenue of, again, setting the actual private server support for this or setting it yourself, you can experience that game. But games like Final Fantasy, Realm Reborn, the most recent MMO that, Final Fantasy has, that's at risk. Because if this doesn't have any form of, private server technology, there could be one day, probably when I'm 60, 70 years old, that game ends up getting taken down, or Square pushes you towards a newer Final Fantasy MMO. Just because something new comes out doesn't mean we as gamers should just give up on the old, in my opinion at least. So again here, you can see that Forza Horizon, two of these games are dead. Microsoft has killed the online services for Forza Horizon and Forza Horizon 2. But of course, if you look at the add risk option over here, ladies and gentlemen, this is important. Because if you play recent Forza games, a lot of these games can be played single player, but they have a pretty important multiplayer community to them, okay? The fact that you can play with your friends is a pretty big advertised feature. The moment that gets taken down, you effectively have a gimped version of a game just sitting on your drive, okay? You can play the single player portion of it, but a lot of these companies sell these games for pretty much full price. So when you buy a game for full price and you find out, wow, I only have like access to 50% of the functionality, I'm sure it's going to piss anyone off, okay? And it should piss you off. And honestly, game companies should not be able to get away with selling you inaccessible parts of a video game. I think that should just be a normalized thing. Are you a fan of Furcadia? You know, I actually used to play this back in the day, all right? I remember there was one kid who was like telling me, you got to play these, you'd come up with a new game every week. Furcadia was one of them. And I did actually remember playing this experience, okay? It was one of these MMO games, I guess online experiences where you're a furry. And you know what? For a game that released in 1996, it's at risk. Because unless things are actually preserved, we have to, you know, be a little bit worried. Now, obviously, for some game companies, like Sony, for instance, there are some silver linings. Gran Turismo Sport, the offline mode, is thankfully developer preserved. So down the road, at some point, if you raise a big enough hoopla, I guess some developers will actually patch their game so that after the service ends from them, you, the gamer, can actually play parts of them offline, as you should. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that the online sections are available, but, you know, it is what it is, all right? Sometimes I guess you just have to take what you can get. You know what's really wild is when you go to, like, Call of Duty in this list, right? Like, all these Call of Duty games are at risk. Black Ops 4 is at risk, all right? Black Ops 6 is so at risk that when you're playing the game offline, you can't even play anything offline. Even the single player requires a constant internet connection for texture streaming. God damn, we're reaching hybrid cloud gaming levels here, aren't we, Microsoft? What's that, Phil Spencer? I love game preservation, guys. Yeah. Until your game servers go offline, you dick. And of course, I love when you go look at Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, MW2, the remaster for MW2, MW3, Vanguard, and of course, if you look at it, always online digital rights management. So when the servers go off, even if you just wanted to play the single player campaign to a COD, which, you know what, I actually like single player Call of Duty, okay? It's like putting on a fucking Fast and the Furious movie. Turn your brain off and shoot motherfucking terrorists all day, son. Yeah, that's gonna be taken away from you. You'll never get access to it, unless, of course, the game is cracked somewhere. And you know what, honestly, at this point, I do not promote piracy. I think piracy is a sin, and you'll probably never be put through the pearly gates to heaven if you do it. But to be real with you, all right, when game companies just do not let us own our games, is piracy even stealing at that point? Which I ask is a purely philosophical question. But of course, you know, you look at games like Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4. It's crazy because Battlefield 3 is fan-preserved with things like Venice Unleashed. Venice Unleashed is a tool that was created by fans so that you could play games like Battlefield 3 without requiring Battlelog or EA games anymore, especially for a game that is so beloved like BF3. But of course, games like Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline, unfortunately, are at risk. And it's kind of a shame because Battlefield 4 is just such a good goddamn game. There is one game that's not on this list that I actually played that is unfortunately dead, and I actually consider it to be a good goddamn game. You might remember a video that I'd made back in June 9th, 2017. I called it the Chinese free-to-play Call of Duty. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in China, there was an entire Call of Duty release that was actually completely free to play, okay? You just needed to be able to create a Chinese account, which if you had Google Translate software and enough time on your hands like I did at the one time, you can actually set it up yourself. And it was a full-on Call of Duty game with complete multiplayer maps accessible. It was actually quite fun. If you could deal with playing games at 300 milliseconds because they were Chinese servers and they weren't meant for gringos down on this side of the aisle, yeah, it was a fun goddamn experience. And it wasn't even just the multiplayer experience attached to it. They had like their own version of Battle Royale thrown into it as well too. They also, from my understanding and my recollection, even had their own version of zombies attached to it. So Gamers who wanted to actually play a pretty interesting point in Call of Duty history, unfortunately, you're not able to do that anymore because it's basically taken away, okay? And it is what it is. Unfortunately, there is no way to private server this, and believe me, I have tried researching. And if you're somebody that's played old PC games like me, you love the concept of private server technology, right? You really do. I feel like a lot of games that come out now, especially games with multiplayer modes, usually having end of life and the ability for you to play offline is mostly an afterthought, if not even a thought at all. And it's kind of funny because as somebody that grew up in an era of playing video games, specifically in that early era of online gaming, you have to remember, online gaming isn't entirely new. Back in the days of Super Nintendo, with this super cool interface, all right, you could actually play copies of Doom, albeit at 5 frames per second against other people, okay? This was back in the Super Nintendo. We were able to get modems up and running and the ability for basic online play over dial-up, not even broadband, to actually work and be a reasonably fun experience, right? And obviously early PC games like Unreal Tournament, really anything, usually ship with bot support or some level of online LAN support, so once those servers from Epic or any company were taken down, you could actually just play over like LAN solutions or tunnel yourself to friends around the world. It's a fun experience that, thankfully, with these older games, they were actually built right into the software. But with newer games, unless there's some private server technology that gets leaked out, unless there's something hacked in or the developer gets involved, these games will die. And according to this group, 70% of these games, in fact, that require internet connectivity just effectively die and get destroyed. So if you're somebody that wanted to preserve hundreds of games, you've basically lost access to effectively gaming history. Gaming software, is some of the hardest shit I feel to preserve. And I don't understand why companies don't do this. Even going back to the earlier point a minute ago, when I played older games like Battlefront 2, for instance, it was a PlayStation 2 game I bought back in the day that was effectively meant to be played online. But the content was so good in the game that obviously the development team realized, hey, everyone's not going to have access to online services right now and maybe even down the road. So what do? They stuffed the game with enough single-player content and the ability for you to play that game with bots or with split-screen functionality. And to this day, I still sometimes whip it up in an emulator or on actual original hardware and play it by myself or with somebody that is at my house, old-fashioned split-screen style. And you know what? I really wish that I could say the same for games nowadays. Games like Halo Infinite that are tied so much to an online infrastructure that just the mere act of even thinking of playing it split screen with my friends without ever connecting to Microsoft servers is nothing much more than like a fucking dream at this point. It's a pipe dream. It really is. Now, I also think it's funny that game developers go out of their way to give less of these games back. Now, down the road, when a re-release does occur, games like Red Dead Redemption have been re-released on PC for the full price of 70 Canadian dollars. Now, if you're somebody like me that has played Red Dead Redemption at some point in your life, you probably know that the multiplayer component was a pretty cool time back in the day, okay? Hanging out with your friends in the Wild West and basically doing dumb hood rat shit in the free mode experience was a vibe. And the thing about it is, the actual current re-release does not have any of that. I don't know why. I don't know if Rockstar is too indie to not have some level of online support for this game, or let's be honest, maybe they just couldn't find a way to stuff microtransactions in. It's crazy that the only way to relive this experience is to throw it into an emulator like RPCS3 and using RPCN, which is a fan-made fan-made private server solution, you can play games like Red Dead Online with your friends. No thanks to Rockstar. Games like Grand Theft Auto 4, I'm sure you remember, have an absolutely amazing online experience attached to it, or they used to. And unless you get software like Happiness MP, where you can use third-party modifications to bring back gaming functionality, these will be forgotten about down the road. I heard something about GTA 4 getting a remaster down the road, and I honestly could not be that excited, because for a game that has the entire radio station so goddamn gutted at this point, I would be shocked that Rockstar would sell a $60 experience or even a $50 experience down the road with all of GTA 4's content, except without that amazing multiplayer experience, which again is something that I don't know why developers choose to completely cut out of their projects down the road. I mean, if you're going to remaster a game, you should just remaster everything about it. Imagine if down the road, Microsoft wanted to do another re-release of Halo, and they were like, you know what? We'll just leave the single player attached to it. Multiplayer, we'll just cut that out on the side, okay? I mean, as stupid as that sounds, it's something that's not out of the realm of possibility at this point. And when looking at a lot of these single player games, right, you have to really pick the storefronts that are the most supportive of this kind of an ideology. Now, there's been a lot of good stuff that I think Stop Killing Games has kind of done, so it's not all doom and gloom, by the way. There are, again, a lot of actual things done in the European Citizens Initiative that have actually pushed Stop Killing Games to be talked about in actual, parliaments and actual, like, government areas. And again, if things look bad in the United States, North America, where it seems like a lot of gaming, hardware makers want to have abilities to brick our systems remotely, which is completely baffling to see, at least the attack in other parts of the world, sizable economies, mind you, is at least looking positive. The other thing about it too is obviously there have been real gaming companies that have really put the effort in to make sure that this is something that is addressed. So GOG is one of those storefronts that I talk about a lot. But GOG has done something, in full transparency, these guys have reached out to me like months ago to basically get me to talk about this campaign, like before anybody knew about it, before like this was publicly spoken about. So I want to just stress off, I'm not being paid by GOG. This is purely me upfront telling you and endorsing this project. So if you go to their website, you can basically find that there is a whole litany of modern games and a lot of older games. And one of the cool projects that they've done is Good Old Games, their preservation project. So for instance, if you go to this page right over here, a lot of older PC games that are just non-existent, games that I've played on my channels like SWAT 4 Gold Edition, okay? Games that I love, games that have garnered hundreds of thousands of views on my channel. This is a game that is dead. And thanks to projects like GOG's Good Old Game project, you can download this, install it within seconds, and play the game properly. In fact, even right now, I do buy from this very, actively. Like every month, I'm probably looking at spending money towards this kind of stuff. But games like Alpha Protocol, which is currently on sale for 33%, brilliant single player experience, okay? Kind of on and off storefronts. I can buy this for $18, download a DRM-free version of this game, meaning I never need to use their servers, never need to connect to the internet except to download one file, really just one time, and I can install this to my Steam Deck, my PC, and just have a good old time, good old game running on my system and experience some real fun, some real actual honest-to-God gaming fun. I think in the end of all this, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that, games are such a community-driven, grassroots, experience when it comes to preservation is probably the biggest blackpilling thing to see right over here. It shouldn't take YouTubers to talk about preserving video games than just having these things preserved by a lot of these big gaming companies in general. I've always said movies, music, a lot of this stuff is really easy to preserve just because, you can always copy a video file off of a piece of disk or screen record it for completion and then just save it somewhere in an archive for the future. You can always record and rip songs, and you always were really able to. But when it comes to video game software that has DRM, more complex checks put into it, or the requirement of an always online experience, that always comes with a price tag, okay? A lot of these games always, release with a foot in the grave because, down the road, there will be a time when a lot of these game services, and I've lived through hundreds of these game services at this point, at least statistically, where games just die. Okay, games will be gone. If anything has an online connection or DRM attached, consider it a game you rent instead of actually purchase. It's one of the reasons why I've always talked about physical media. It really needs to be properly preserved. I've always been against game key cards or technologies like that because, again, I really believe that if you're going to be buying a game, you should be able to play it, especially down the road. Some of my most favorite games ever played. I mean, shit, just literally this morning when I was scratching my balls, I played a bit of Max Payne 2 on my Steam Deck. A game that is older than some of you people watching this video right now, easily. And again, if it wasn't for the fact that that game was a fully shipped piece of software that, again, was something that didn't require online connectivity or especially even launchers or active connections to play, things could be a lot different. I really would be interested to see 10 years down the road in 2030, 2040, especially 2040, if the games that, some of you kids are growing up with, down the road, are you going to be even able to play them? Will those experiences that you once really loved and yearned for, are they going to be gone? Are they going to even exist down the road? You know, it's a question that, you know, if you don't really have the forward thinking capacity to really look at what the world will look like 10, 20 years from now, you're never really going to get it. All right. And that's not, you know, supposed to be a dig. It's just supposed to remind you, it's like, hey, if you love something now, there's a good chance you're probably going to want to try it some point down the road. Heck, even for a lot of older experiences, there's a lot of people that just jump into gaming and they're like, man, I kind of want to see what the original like Grand Theft Auto looked like. I kind of want to see the original Pokemon games. I kind of want to see those original Legend of Zelda games. And, you know, if there are game franchises you're tapping into, there's a good chance that you'll never be able to experience those older games like people like me or people who are more in touch with the entire hobby were back then. That is a pretty scary time. That is a pretty scary thought. And it's one thing that, you know, videos like this that I'm making are important to me because the more I can remind you of that reality, the better it really is. And hopefully you understand it. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.